Hey, everybody. Good to see you. How was everyone's long weekend? Everyone have a good weekend last weekend? Kind of? Well, it's good to be back because last weekend as a church we took a Sabbath where we didn't do anything. Maybe you didn't realize that, but we did. And we were hanging around on Tuesday night at our midweek dinner, and we were going around the table as we usually do as we're having dinner or just after and saying, hey, so what did you guys do for the long weekend? Just giving updates. And every single person, at least at our midweek table, was away doing something else. So it made me think, like, man, in our culture, long weekends, especially after a long, cold, what feels like a drawn-out winter, it's like this breath of fresh air to have good weather again. And the May long weekend is like that first expression of, oh man, summer's coming, the weather's been so good, and everyone just kind of splits. And so we just kind of had a Sabbath as a church, just recognizing the rhythm of our culture and also our rhythm, that it's sometimes nice just to say, we don't have to be here on Sunday, meeting in this way to be the church. Maybe it provides us a week off, provides us an opportunity to meet in a whole different kind of way with friends, family, intentionally having people over or going to see people. And so it was just a wonderful experience, which then prompted a conversation this week at our leadership team meeting, talking about the rest of the long weekends in the summer. So I just want to let you know a little quick update. So we just thought, you know what we're going to do? We're going to not fight the system. We're just going to say every long weekend this summer, so it'll be July 1st and August, whatever that one is, 4 or 5. The long weekend of August are both just going to be Sabbaths. Sabbathify. Is that the plural? What's the plural of Sabbath? Sabbaths. It's my lisp. Anyways, we won't be meeting in this way on those 2 long weekends, which is great because July 1st, Canada Day, there'll be so much going on. It's a perfect opportunity to do stuff, invite your neighbors over for a barbecue, do things, go watch fireworks, all that great stuff. And then the long weekend, August, is just another kind of pause, catch your breath, do something fun. And so that's what we're going to do. And also just want to let you know that we are here, other than the July 1st weekend, we're here all summer, in July at least, every weekend here at film.ca. So other than the long weekend, July 1st, we're here the rest of the Sundays to the end of July. And then in August, we start with the Sabbath, then we have the camping trip, then we have something else we're still working on, and then a pool party. So we won't be here any Sundays in August. We're just mixing up our rhythm, doing some things differently. And it's always a great time as a church because so many people are in different places at different times. It allows us just to meet in different ways and hang out and build relationships in different ways and kind of be church family together. So I'm really excited about that. Just we'll be spreading a lot more information as we go, but just wanted to make sure you know. Okay, this morning we're just going to take 1 week. And hi, I'm Matt. If we've never met, if you're new to the reunion, I sometimes just start rolling. But I'm Matt. Good to have you here. We're going to take just this week to talk about what it means to be extended family, to be family together, particularly coming out of some opportunities Bobby and I had about 3 or 4 weeks ago when we were in Kenya. But I'll get to that in a second. I thought it would be really good. There's a number of people who've joined our church in the last little bit and don't know a lot about who we are as our own church, Reunion Oakville, and then a group we belong to, and the denomination, which is like the broader family we belong to, and then even more extended family after that. And so we thought it would be really good for us just to take a moment and just talk about that, what that means for us, what we have to kind of grab from that. I know whenever we have a conversation about family, it may ping you in a couple ways. So if you've come from a really great, healthy, loving, caring family, then you may feel like, I love conversations about any kind of family because it only stirs up great memories and feelings. And you're maybe trying to establish family rhythms that build on the solid foundation that you've already experienced from a great, loving kind of community. Also, though, on the other end of the spectrum, we know that whenever we talk about family, for you or for some in this room, perhaps it conjures up some not so great feelings, memories, where there's pain and brokenness and separation, anxiety. All those things might come up as well. And so maybe for you, you are trying to let go of what was and reestablish new forms of healthy and normal and starting some new family traditions and rhythms in a new, healthy, loving kind of way. So those are kind of the extremes. And then there's, again, in this room, probably everything in between and a mix-up of all that. So we just want to recognize that. We also, I think it's good to acknowledge that sometimes people don't have a great kind of bloodline earthly family, but you've done an amazing job at welcoming people into your family who you're not blood relatives with and forming a new kind of identity and family. Or maybe you have a healthy family and you've welcomed someone else or another group around your table, around your family, and they're part of your traditions and your family rhythms. And all these things are just wonderful expressions of what it looks like for us to discover and to continue to move forward in a healthy direction as family. And so I want to talk about that in a spiritual community kind of way, what it means for us as Reunion. What does it mean for us to be a family locally here? And then what does it mean as we relate to the global family that we're a part of? So that's kind of where we're rolling. But let's look at a couple scripture passages that set this up. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to John chapter 19. It's going to be on the screen as well. It may feel weird that we're jumping to the crucifixion account to start to talk about family, but there's this one really interesting tidbit that John records in his gospel about the crucifixion scene that I think is really, really important to the conversation of family. So I want to start there. So John chapter 19, we're going to begin at verse 25 if you have your Bible or your app, whatever you want, or it's up here as well. Just encourage you to follow along. So let me read this for us. So Jesus has been crucified. He is on the cross at this moment. And here's what John records in his gospel. He says, standing near the cross were Jesus' mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother standing there beside the disciple he loved, he said to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to this disciple, "Here is your mother." And from then on, this disciple took her into his home. "Dear woman, here is your son." And he said to the disciple, "And here is your mother." So it's pretty interesting. At this moment, as Jesus is on the cross, he becomes aware of the people. I'm sure there's a large crowd gathered around, but he becomes aware of these couple particular people standing there, his mom being one of them, and the disciple he loves that we know is John, the disciple John. And so he does something really interesting in this moment. While he is enduring all the physical pain and agony, everything that he's working to accomplish through his death on the cross, he's also noticing kind of family relationships standing right there. And he calls out to his mom and the disciple he loves, and he kind of reorients the way they connect to each other. I don't know what their relationship, we can only speculate what their relationship might have been, but he's saying to the disciple and to the mother, I'm changing the way you may know or the relationship or friendship you have, and I'm switching it around here. Mom, here's your son, and to the disciple John, here's your mother. And providing safety and security and a sense of hope then in the midst of his death for his mom, and reorienting this kind of community. Jesus, through all his teaching, as everything he's been setting up and establishing through his teaching and what he models in his behavior, is forming this alternate kingdom community. We've talked a lot about that this year as we work through the Sermon on the Mount. What does it mean to be an alternate kingdom community? This way of relating to each other. And right then, in his kind of last few moments, he brings his mother and his friend John, and he brings them together in a really interesting way. This is a bit of a side note. In Matthew's gospel, I think this is interesting, so I'm just going to throw it out. In Matthew's gospel, as he's recounting some of the people who are at the scene of the crucifixion, he's kind of mentioning different people, and he mentions that Mary, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, is there. Sons of Zebedee are James and John. And so there's been some conversation, and some people would say that this woman then is Mary's sister. So when in John's gospel it mentions Mary's sister, so what's happening here in this moment is it's Jesus' mom and Jesus' cousin, John. So they may have already had a relationship in a family kind of way, extended family, cousin, nephew kind of way, aunt and nephew kind of way. And so Jesus is, again, shaking that up and saying, actually, there's a bit more here. We're going to not just say cousin or nephew or aunt, we're going to say son and mother. There's a note here. I just want to read you this quote. It says, in Jesus' culture, this is from Gary Burge, in Jesus' culture, extended families were extremely important, and the cousin relationships highly treasured. For Jesus to be linked to his extended family would have been commonplace. Okay, so there's this new sense of family and community that we even see at the moment of the cross. So then flip to Acts chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, again, up on here. So this is the description of the early church getting started. It might be, for some of you, a really familiar passage. Some of you, maybe this is kind of the first you're hearing about it. But after Jesus' death and resurrection, the church and the followers of Jesus are learning what it means to form community and to relate to each other in brand new ways. And so this is what we read in Acts chapter 2. It says, beginning in verse 42, it says, all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all. And the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. So yesterday, anyone love like lawn care and gardening. And is there any fans of that? You can be honest. Okay. So I think it is one of those dividing kind of topics, right? You either love it. I don't know if anyone's lukewarm on the idea of gardening. You either really love it because you have kind of the green thumb, or you don't. And so I'm definitely on the, I hate it. I hate doing it. I hate cutting the grass. I hate every spring when it's like all the weeds. And our front lawn was, if you've been over in the last little bit, was just a nightmare. We're probably that neighbor that the other neighbors were like grumbling about, you know? And we rent the place we're at, which probably adds fuel to the fire. Like those renters are like, look at their place. So yesterday afternoon, we thought we gotta get on top of this. And we had cut the grass once last week, but it had already been so long and we don't have a bagger on the mower, so those clumps were now all over yellow and just dried out. So it was really bad. And then yesterday I was cutting the grass. Normally Silas does it, but he was away a little bit, so I was pushing, and the grass was so long, plus the clumps from other weeks, that it kept stalling out the mower. I don't know if you've ever had that. I don't know if the blade's not sharp enough. We haven't sharpened it since we've lived there like 3.5 years, so it probably needs a sharpen. And, you know, and I'm not that guy, so it kept dying. You kept starting it, and you would slowly drop it down into like a new swath and lift it up if it was about, it's like total, like, I was an idiot. So I'm pushing along. I'm sure it's quite the spectacle. And when that wasn't working, I just raised the wheels on the lawnmower a bit, because I'm like, well, we'll just cut it a little bit higher. Next week, we'll cut it lower. Just trying all these different things to get it done. And then I look back, and now it's a mix of new clumps of cut grass and the old yellowy clumps of cut grass. So then we decide we got to rake this up. Like, we are like just the hillbilly hicks on this street if we leave it like this. And so we get it together, we put it in yard waste bags, and it's starting to look really, really great. But then when you cut the grass and you rake up all the trimmings, what do you notice that's left? All the edges, right? So along the fence, it's like this high, around the trees. Like, man, everything's looking pretty good with what we're doing except that. And so the landlord had left us this gas trimmer. So I went and found that in the back shed, and I managed to get it started. But it wouldn't keep running, no matter how I did the choke full or mid, or anyways, it wouldn't stay on. And every time I had it going, there was like these plumes of really crazy smoke billowing out of this thing. And I didn't know what was going on. And then a neighbor came over, finally, to the rescue. I thought to the rescue, but no, it was mostly just to tell me what I was doing wrong. And he said, you mixed the gas and oil to the wrong percentage. Actually, first he said, is that a 2-stroke motor? I don't know what that means. So I just said, yes. He's like, oh, I can tell by the smoke. And he was downwind. He was like, I can tell by the smoke that you have the gas and oil. It's supposed to be like, looking at Dirk, who's like a mechanic, he's probably like, again, you can help me later. Like, it's supposed to be at a 40-to-1 ratio, which the way we've always done is we put some gas and we just do like this with the oil. And that's how we've done it. So clearly our measurements are way out. And he's like, you have to clean out that whole engine. And so then Tebey and Hadley get scissors from the kitchen. And they decide to start so I'm like, girls, you gotta like trim around stuff. And so they're down sitting on the grass, like cut, shove a bum, cut. And I'm just watching this whole thing go down. I'm like, I'm a disaster. This is terrible. So then I think, you know what? In every single garage on this street is probably like the perfect trimmer. I'm sure every single person has one here, but I don't know them that well. Like, I haven't enough relationship where I could say, can I just take it and borrow it? The one neighbor who I do, he wasn't there. The rest, I haven't really gotten to know super well. They're a little bit standoffish. And so I'm just watching the girls cut, and I'm like, oh man, if only there was someone I knew well enough or family close by, because I would just buy it, right? So then I knew my dad. My mom is here today. I knew my dad was bringing my mom over to hang out with us and spend the night last night. So I called my dad quick, and I said, when you come to drop off Mom, can you bring your trimmer? Weed whacker is like the street lingo for that. And then so he brings it along, and we just like zip through it. It looks amazing. Drive by our street today. You'll be so impressed by the Vincents. The right tool makes the difficult job just so much easier. And what it made me think of when I was standing there yesterday, for all this like ad-libbing I'm doing and telling the story, is that you share your stuff and your possessions with the people you have closest relationship with. And it starts normally with family. You'd call a dad or a mom or a brother or sister, and you'd say, hey, can I borrow this? Can we share this kind of stuff? because that makes sense. And then as soon as you keep going kind of more concentric circles out, it becomes less common for us to share things with people who aren't our family, because our possessions kind of become things that define us and a source of connection, identity, and what if it breaks, and what do you do? And we just don't do that in our culture, right? Our culture is not one of those sharing, generally speaking. There's exceptions, of course, but generally like that way we share those kinds of things. When I read this passage in Acts chapter 2, we get this amazing picture of the way these people who would not have been blood family, but the thing that held them together was their choice and decision to follow Jesus as disciples, coming together and sharing things in ways that at least I have never experienced. Sure, we may share a lawnmower or shovel or snowblower, but imagine selling possessions and giving the money so that someone has. Imagine completely changing your financial picture if you have kind of positive cash flow to help someone who has been really struggling. Imagine being so intentional with meals that you make that the priority, that we're sharing meals, we're eating, we're learning, we're praying, we're devoting ourselves to teaching, scripture study. It's just this beautiful picture of this alternate community that emerges from the book of Acts, from Jesus first commissioning kind of his mom, almost in a covenant way. This is your son, this is your mother, almost changing in a covenant way the way they relate to each other. And then the expansion of that, as we read in Acts, as the early church is blossoming and growing and bursting at the seams, is people are discovering in a brand new way what it means to be family together, sharing things that would normally be theirs, not tremors, but whatever the case may be, sharing and doing life in this beautiful way. And I wanted to mention those two things because as I start telling some stories about who we are and how we relate and who we belong to, I think it requires us to shift our thinking on what does it mean to relate to each other and to own each other, not in a dominating, possessive kind of way, but to accept and embrace each other and own each other in a way that wants to see the best out of each person here, because as we've each individually chosen to follow Jesus, or maybe you're just on the journey of exploring that, to say, what does it mean to belong to something that's greater than myself, even beyond my kind of nuclear family? So let's start here. Let's start with reunion. What's our time? Okay, we're still doing okay. So let's start with reunion. We've been around for about 3+ years. This is our own little church family. From the living room to the moonshine to the Performing Arts Center, now here. There's just been this wonderful sense of growing. People have joined at different stages. We've lost some family members along the way, which I guess is the ebb and flow of life. And together we are in this process of continuing to push in and discover what does it mean not only for us to be a place where people can discover and follow the teachings of Jesus in good friendship and community, but also be engaged with our city and to have a sense of, God, you have us here in this place. What does it look like for us to love and serve and care for the people who may not ever show up here, but we feel the sense of ownership in a great way to love and care for people, regardless if they're ever a part of reunion or not in a direct way. And so we're going to be talking more about that as we head into the fall, but we have 6 culture statements. This may be new for some of you. 6 culture statements that were formed as a part of us discovering who we are a couple years ago. And if you've never heard us teach through this, we're going to be doing it again this coming fall. But these are the 6, or at least the 6 icons that go along with that. So pupils is a culture of apprenticeship, talking about what it means to follow Jesus. People is a culture of table. What does it mean to gather? It's this thing we were reading about, sharing meals, breaking bread, being in each other's homes for prayer and study, and just relationship on a regular weekly basis. Party goers, this is a culture of celebration. Jesus was accused by the religious establishment of being a drunkard and a glutton. So what does that look like then? Was he a drunkard? Was he a glutton? I don't think so. It's the people he hung out with, the people he spent time with, the ways he interact with people who are always on the outside by celebrating and having feasts and meals and parties. What does that mean for us then to be our point of contact, to care and love, or maybe we're the best party throwers in the whole city, and how do we work towards that? Peacemakers, a culture of reconciliation. We pursue Jesus' way of peace and serve as agents of reconciliation. Again, we're going to dig more into that in the fall. And then as pioneers, a culture of adventure and innovation, that even as we are forming as a church and discovering what we're supposed to be, kind of open-handedly making changes and moves as we need to be flexible, how do we continue to have that heart and spirit that we want to be adventurous and innovative and have eyes to see what God's doing and be willing to respond to those things? And then the last one is planters, a culture of multiplication. Even as we have been planted and we have broader family who have helped us do that, how do we help plant and establish other groups? So that's how it kind of started over the last 3 years. We have lots more to discover and talk about. So that's Reunion Oakville, just a really quick nutshell. And then what's happened over the last few years, again, some of you will know this, some of you this is all new, is that part of my role, I also have kind of another side gig that I work on as I help other church planters get started. And So then we helped our friend Dave. A lot of you will know Dave and Susan. They started Reunion out in St. John's. And the thing that holds us together are those 6 culture statements. So we were both at that point like individual local churches doing our own thing with our own leadership, figuring out what it means to follow Jesus in our own context and city. But we said that what if we choose to work around these culture statements together? That's what holds us together, and let's learn and work together and see what we can discover as 2 separate church plants, but choosing relationship. And then after that came Hamilton with Eric and Laura, and then after that came Dean and Ayla in Richmond, BC, and then after that, most recently, was Jeremy and Karen in Brockville. And so what's formed is this network of church planters called, now Reunion is no longer just, that's our church name, like 3 years ago we were in our living room. It's now also represents a network of church planters who are intentionally trying to say, hey, can we be our own churches, give us freedom to dream and explore and be innovative in our context, but we also don't want to be alone. We believe there's something important about being together and having relationship as family. And so I know I directly benefit from that. We have meetings as a team every single week together. Sometimes you'll see them pop in and out if they're ever in this area. But we are learning as a church from the learnings they are also having. So every week when they share things that they're learning or struggling or wrestling with or things that they celebrate, I get a chance to hear those stories and think, man, maybe that's something that we've been missing, or how can that be used to shape us? And so it's this wonderful kind of a dynamic that's happening. But then we're not an island on our own. We are part of a denominational family. If the word denomination is kind of weird to you, it's basically this broader connection. It's this affiliation, it's this membership we're part of. It's kind of like our kind of spiritual church parents. And there's a bunch of brethren, we're called Be in Christ Church of Canada. And there's churches across the nation, and they helped us get started a number of years ago. They provided financial resources and support and care so that we could get started. They were kind of the parents who said, here's some stuff to get going, and kind of commissioned us. And so we recognize that they've just been an amazing support to us. If you don't know much about them, you can please go online. It's canadianbic.ca. You can read all about them. One of the cool things that helps us to do, beyond just getting a broader perspective and know that we aren't on our own and all those kinds of things, we are also able to be involved in projects globally that we would never be a part of on our own. We would just never have the resources or connections to do that. So every year, even though we're a young church and we're trying to figure out our own financial picture, we tithe back to our parents, kind of to our family, 10% of everything that comes in. And every kind of church does that across the country, and that pool of money then is used to not only resource and train and equip pastors and congregations here to help plant new churches. We received chunks from that pot when we were getting started, but also to be involved in different initiatives around the world. And so what I want to do is I want to show you this short video. And a few weeks ago, we had our annual general meeting as a denomination. Most of you, I don't think any of you were there. Maybe some of you were there. It's generally not the thing that most people get like really jazzed about hanging out at on a Saturday morning. But there was this really great video that Alex and some of his team put together to talk about a new project in Nepal. The BIC Church, believe it or not, the BIC Church is all around the world in loads of countries. I should know the number, I don't. Loads of countries. And I want to show this not only because it's a great project that's getting off the ground, but also I think it helps us maybe get our eyes off our own shoes a little bit and look up and be like, there's so many things happening in our broader family that we don't even know about. How do we start paying attention to those things? So we're going to roll this video, and then I'll keep us rolling. So obviously that's just brand new, fresh program. If you're interested in learning more about that, we can chat, put you in touch with the right people. I'm not for sure saying that we as a church are like full on getting behind that, other than to say it may be something that sparks something for someone here, or maybe it is something we say as a church, how do we get behind that? But anyways, there's ways for us to learn and to grow globally that we get to be a part of because we're part of also a broader extended family where we're trying to learn what it means to relate to each other, to connect, to serve, to maybe support out of our abundance, so that people have the basic things that they need. We're wrestling with all those things. And so we want to continue to figure out what that looks like. And then a number of weeks ago, Bobby and I got, it was actually an amazing privilege to go to represent our denomination, Be in Christ Church of Canada, to what's called the World Mennonite Conference, which when you hear the term Mennonite, for some of you, maybe you think like the horse and buggy kind of deal, which is kind of that a long time ago, and maybe even still today. But it's a collection, it's a gathering of Anabaptist related denominations from all over the world. And so it happens once every 8 years. And so we were sent as the Canadian delegates. And it turned into be, in some ways, more than I ever imagined in terms of connection and learning and having my own perspective just shaped. I've traveled quite a bit, but this was just a really interesting time to have so much time with leaders from around the world. I think that was one of the differences. And so I have a picture. So this isn't all, but this is most of the delegates representing different countries. There was over 300 people in total there, representing 50-something countries. And so we're at this little conference center just outside of Nairobi, and literally from churches and denominations from all over the world, discussing and learning and sharing stories of success and encouragement and the great things God is doing, and being really broken and honest about the struggles in different national churches and what they're wrestling with. And it was this awesome thing. There's so many stories I could tell. I want to share one at least with you, because it felt like it was like right in the moment. History is happening as we were talking about it. So we were there for 8 or 10 days, and then everyone was flying out at different times, obviously, and they had different shuttles taking different groups of people back to the airport depending on your departure time. And so we had a later evening flight, and so we're at dinner. It was the last night we were there, and the group had kind of dwindled down. And so Bobby and I were there with some different people we had never actually had a meal with yet that week. So it was kind of nice. We're meeting some different people. And it was the same evening that the day before was when Kim Jonghoon from North Korea had crossed the demilitarized area and had met with the prime minister or president of South Korea. So we're sitting at this table, and I hadn't heard about it. The internet was really sketchy. I hadn't heard that it happened. And there was a guy pastor representing a church leadership team from South Korea was at our table. So we're going around introducing ourselves, who we are, eating dinner. And then there's this moment that it felt like everything kind of stopped, because he started sharing about what had just happened, about North and South Korea, who had been separated since the war in the 50s, having this interaction. No leader from North Korea had ever come across in this way. And so as he started talking, we all just kind of put down our forks, and we were just pausing, because we could sense like there was this gravity to the story that he was telling, that, we felt rude to be jamming like fried chicken or something while he's sharing this thing. It was like this really kind of special moment. And he had said that, he said something to the effect of, we have been praying my whole life. He was probably a man in his 40s, just maybe a couple years older than me. He's like, we've been praying my whole life that God would soften the North Koreans' heart so that we could talk again about reconciliation, where families can once again see each other who have been separated this way. And then he paused, and he started crying. And then he said, I think God is answering our prayer that families can be restored again. And it was just this amazing, solemn moment where it feels like such a privilege to be able to hear stories from people in different parts of the world in ways that you would never just normally pick up on. So I could have seen that story in, CBC News or on TV, any news outlet, talking about the significance of that and giving all the facts. But then you have a chance to hear a personal story from someone who has not been able to see certain family members ever in his whole life, just knowing they exist because of the separation in the countries and the war that has happened. And sharing about their prayer, this ongoing prayer, his whole life, that God would do something to break down walls and borders so that kind of a grand family reunion could happen again. It just felt like so special and such a privilege. And again, another reminder while we're in Kenya that we're just a part of something much bigger than ourselves, and we need to pay attention to these things. It's so easy to kind of get focused on our own stuff. So anyways, that was one of the most amazing moments. There were also a lot of BIC leaders, Brethren in Christ leaders from around the world, from representing different national churches who were there. So this is a collection of it's called the International Brethren in Christ Association. So folks all the way from Japan through different countries in Africa, through Europe, through South America, all over. And I don't know what you don't know any of these folks, so it probably doesn't mean much to you. But when I look at it, one of the things I'm most struck by, and how small sometimes my perspective gets, is that there's not many white people, right? Sometimes our picture of following Jesus and what the church looks like is just our context, which is primarily white people. But here we're talking about following Jesus in different contexts, and the chance to learn and have my imagination stretched by so many people whose reality is so different than mine, and yet the Jesus we follow is so the same. It's just beautiful. There's something beautiful about extended family. And so this was one night where you just kind of pulled aside in the midst of a larger conference just to be together and to share updates on the church. And so I had a chance to talk about reunion, which was really cool. And then the next slide, I think I have some more. So these are the two leaders from the the BIC Church in Cuba. And they don't speak English. I don't speak any Spanish, so we had to often grab translators. But kind of hanging out and learning, and some of our fellow churches here in Southern Ontario are partnering with them in different ways, which is really cool to hear some of those stories. We can share more later. And then the next one here, so these guys are awesome. So in the middle is Francis Komodo. He is the kind of the leader of the BIC Church in Malawi. And then this is Anthony here, and he is the leader of the BIC Church in Kenya. And I know Francis from before. Francis has been to Canada. I've been in different places where we've overlapped and hung out, so he's already been a friend. I actually took Francis skating for the first time when he was here, which was amazing. I'm not a good skater, but compared to Francis, I was like Wayne Gretzky. It was amazing. He ended up sitting in a chair, and I just kind of pushed him out, and he would put his skates out and kind of lean back. I felt like we invented luge in that moment. But so yeah, they lead those two churches. We probably spent most of our time that week together because they are friends. And so I want to share from their words to you guys. I had asked them if they could send some greetings back and tell us a little bit about who they are and their experience and what they're celebrating, what they're wrestling with. Again, just to broaden our perspective and think about things our broader family is working through. So first from Francis in Malawi. They also taught me about WhatsApp. Do you guys have WhatsApp? Okay, so I'm clearly behind the times. So Anthony from Kenya helped me download that app and got me all set up. So I think he was so shocked that I had never heard of it, which speaks more to me than anything. So anyway, so now we're on WhatsApp all the time. Anyways, so from Francis in the middle, this is what he says. Addressing Reunion, Oakville. He says, we praise the Lord that things are going very well. Despite the challenges facing us, the church is growing in number and in spirit. People are coming to know and follow Jesus almost every week, and they are willing to walk with him. Currently, our biggest struggle on a national level is finances and how we can move to make the church self-supportive. Neither I nor any of the pastors I oversee receive any financial stipend. We serve and minister because we're called to lead and serve in this way, and we survive by the grace of God. Hunger is a big issue right now in many of our districts. Army worms and dry spells have destroyed much of our crops. Many sleep without taking food each night. Personally, I am doing well. My daughter is hoping to move into a degree program in public health, finances, if the finances are there, and my son is finishing up grade 12, which they call Form 4. On a family level, more personally, finances are very difficult. Please pray that God will continue to meet our needs so that we can do the work he's called us into. Greetings and prayers to you and your church family. And then from Anthony in Kenya, he says this. He says, overall, the church is doing very well. A little bit of context. The BIC Church as a denomination in Kenya is relatively new. And so it's just getting started. It's at its very beginning stages. Some of the other churches in primarily in different Southern African countries, BIC has been there in many, many years, but it's fairly new in Kenya. So he says the church is doing well. He says we have about 500 adults and 1,500 kids connected to churches across the country. Anthony, as a leader, meets with these pastors for training and resourcing at least once a month. There's a strong sense and desire of these leaders to receive training. Many of the pastors lead without any training. They basically have a Bible and they plant a church and they go for it. So that's kind of how it goes. So he's trying to equip and train them. He does have formal education. They are hungry and eager to go. There are challenges, though, on a national level. Again, because they're a young church, he says, we aren't officially registered or recognized yet with the government. It would cost us $300 US for us to register our constitution. It would cost us another $250 US for him to be registered as the national director or bishop of the church. On a personal level, he says, we are struggling to pay our rent as a family, kids' school fees, rent for the building we use on our Sunday gatherings. Again, he says, and I send my love and greetings and prayers to you in the Reunion Church. So I share all this not because I'm trying to say, hey, we have to jump in and meet this need or that need, or it's not about guilt or anything. But I do want us, I think we're starting to move into that life stage as a church where we have established some rhythms of who we are and what we're about. And now it's time for us to say, well, and what's our next step? And I do think our next step, not only is it have to do with deeper level of local community engagement, what does it mean to love and serve and care for our city? And as a leadership team, we've been having lots of conversations on that. We mentioned some of that at the family meeting last month. But also in a global way, what can we do? What are some small, practical steps that we can do to build relationship, to let others know that we're extended family over here in Canada, and what can we learn and share with each other, and how can we support, and how then does that shape and change us as a church? We can't meet every need. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And right now we aren't doing anything globally apart from our connection through our denomination. And so I just want to bring all this up to say to you, I think it's time for us to start dreaming and imagining and praying and being ready to say, God, what are you saying to us? And what does that look like for the stuff and finances and gifts we have to be leveraged on a greater level for the global church family? So there's no huge next steps right now other than we want to start this conversation in a more intentional, formal way and get this stuff figured out. One real practical thing, though, is when we were in Kenya, and Anthony was telling us about, it's $300 to register so that they're an official church. I was like, man, $300, like we got to figure this out. And then he said, for me to be recognized as the leader of the church, I guess there are two separate ways you have to apply with it, the government. It was another $250 US, so $550 US. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't have that right now, and we need to continue conversation. But what Bobby and I did, and I'm not trying to make this about us because I need your help with this, is Bobby went to this place called the Maasai Market, which is like a maker's craft market, and bought like tons of like jewelry, like beaded stuff, earrings, all that kind of jazz, simply because it's so cheap there, relatively cheap, that if we come back and we sell it to our friends, we figured we could maybe even make that $300 difference, pay back the amount of investment, and have $300 extra to say, hey, Anthony, here's the money, register yourself as a church, and we'll figure out the next step. So I don't know how we're going to do that. Bobby's kind of leading the charge on that, but if you get invited through like Facebook Marketplace or something to spread the word, please spread the word. It's not benefiting the Vincents. It's trying to say, can we help this church get registered and meet that need? Or maybe you have a contact or have an idea on how we can help them. But I thought, man, that's a pretty simple step for us to say, let's get that church registered. Let's get Anthony registered as the national church leader. Not that it changes his day-to-day financial picture, but it allows them to take another step in terms of being credible in the country where they're trying to plant churches and the wonderful work he's doing. And so if you have thoughts on that or creative ideas, whatever, please let me know. We're going to figure that out. Let me just leave it there. I could keep rolling, but let me just leave it there. I do think there's deep things for us to discover and exciting things that we will learn as we submit ourselves faithfully to other people, that we end up learning and gaining so much as a church, which will shape our culture. And I think that's part of our next learning, our next step as a church. So we're going to come around the table. Danny and Ty are going to come and serve us. Jamie and the crew are going to lead us again in some singing. But let me just say this. As we come around the table, some of the best family times, even with midweek every Tuesday, like I just love that we have a dinner together and we talk about following Jesus together, and we talk about hobbies and any random thing. We celebrate and we grieve and we support each other. So if you're not in a midweek group, Tuesday night at our house, you're always welcome. There's a couple other options also on Tuesday nights, so let me know. I'll get you connected with the group. But that rhythm of eating and sharing a meal and learning from each other and praying together is so important to how God is shaping us and forming us. But then every Sunday as we're kind of together, we come around the table. We use these elements that Jesus gives and tells and instructs his followers to do, where we take bread and a cup. It's grape juice here. There's gluten-free options on this side. And we take the broken bread, which represents his broken body, and the juice, which represents his shed blood, and we recognize that through Jesus' work on the cross, even as he's helping form this new sense of identity and community, he's also extending this invitation to all of us, to this open invitation to come to the table, to say, if you want to say yes and follow Jesus, come to the table. And this, every week for us, is part of our liturgy. Every week for us, it's a reminder of who we belong to, and that we belong to something more than ourselves. So as you come, as we're singing, anybody can come if you said yes and we're following Jesus, or maybe this is the first morning you're saying, I'm saying yes to Jesus and I'm coming forward. You can come and just break a piece of bread off and dip it in the juice and eat it, and we welcome you to the table. Jesus provides it for us. Let me just read from the Apostle Paul. He is reminding the early church about what it means to gather around the table, sometimes called the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. Let me just read this. He says, actually, let's stand. Let's read this together as we stand, and then we'll sing and we'll share the elements together. So Paul says to the early church in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, let me go over with you again exactly what goes on in the Lord's Supper and why it is so centrally important. I received my instructions from the Master himself and passed them on to you. The Master Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. Having given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body broken for you. Do this to remember me. After supper, he did the same thing with the cup. This cup is my blood, my new covenant with you. Each time you drink this cup, remember me. What you must solemnly realize is that every time you eat this bread and every time you drink this cup, you reenact in your words and actions the death of the Master. You will be drawn back to this meal again and again until the Master returns. You must never let familiarity breed contempt. Anyone who eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Master irreverently is like part of the crowd that jeered at him and spit on him at his death. Is that the kind of remembrance you want to be a part of? Examine your motives, test your heart, and come to this meal in holy awe. So Jesus, we thank you for family. Our own maybe nuclear family that's been such a blessing, or families that have embraced us when we've been longing for connection. Thank you for our broader church family, for the reunion crew and network as it spreads out across the country, for the way we learn from each other. God, thanks for people who are following Jesus for the first time because of steps of planting and establishing local communities in different cities in different ways. Thank you for our global family. The amazing privilege to learn and to just sit humbly as you hear about stories of sacrifice and faithfulness and your provision in just what feels like miraculous ways. Thanks for friendships like Francis and Anthony and different leaders from around the world, what the church in Nepal are trying to get started to care for their kids. God, we don't know fully what our role is, but we know we have a role. We don't want to be that family member who sits at the end of the table and only asks for more food and more food and more food. So help us to know what it means to pass those plates, to give back to others, to welcome others to the table, and be gracious and generous even as you've been so gracious and generous with us. And so now we come around the table together, we eat this bread, and we taste the juice that represents your blood. And Jesus, we thank you for the hope and identity and forgiveness we have because of your death and resurrection on the cross. We sing, we worship, and we come to the table as family. Amen.